Hello, everybody, and welcome to our session on obstacles and opportunities for gender digital finance. My name is Zainab Said, and I am from Kash Foundation. I am very happy to be moderating this session with these expert panelists that I have today. As you all know, we've seen a lot of spike in digital finance, and of course, our area of interest is financial inclusion. So, we're going to be talking about what are the potential challenges and opportunities that exist in this space. I will quickly introduce my panelists and without further ado, go into questions. But before I do that, there's an important announcement. If you have any questions for the panelists, you can write them on the chat and we will get those questions over here and have our panelists answer them for you. So we'll start by introducing Ms. Anthony Koenig, who is the gender lead at CGAP. Ms. Koenig has over 20 years of experience in microfinance and financial inclusion and has been closely following the scene in terms of digital finance. Thank you so much, Anthony, for taking time out to join us for this panel discussion. Up next, we have Ms. Tanya Khan Jamal, who is a senior investment officer at the IFC. She has over 16 years of experience in working in financial institutions and currently heads the IFC's FIG business for Pakistan and Afghanistan. Thank you so much, Tanya, for taking time out to be with us today. Up next, we have Dr. Mariam Mustafa, who is an assistant professor at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. Some of you may know the Lahore University of Management Sciences is Pakistan's premier higher education institution. Dr. Mariam has a PhD in computer science. And her research interests include human and computer interactions with a special focus on gender and how gender interactions affect technology. Thank you so much, Dr. Mariam, for being part of this discussion today. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Shahzad Iqbal, who is the Chief Financial Officer at Kash Foundation. Kash, as you may know, is Pakistan's first non-banking microfinance institution specialized for women. Shahzad is a chartered accountant with 20 years of experience in finance. At Kash, he not only looks at our finance and at the finance things that we do, but he's also been spearheading the digital wallets and the transformation towards digital wallet disbursements that Kash has been doing. Thank you so much, Shahzad, for taking time out to be with us today. Without further ado, I'll step into the first question. I have one question that I'd like to ask all of our panelists. So I'll start with that. And then maybe, Anthony, you can give us the first response, followed by Tanya, followed by Dr. Mariam, and followed by Shahzad. So my first question is, with respect to digital financial inclusion, what do you think has been the greatest achievement since the beginning of the pandemic? So over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Zainab, and thank you all for joining us today. I think this is a really important topic, and hopefully throughout the discussion we can learn more from each other. I think one of the issues that has been very clear throughout the pandemic is that it has really put a spotlight on what doesn't work for women. There's now, I think, increased awareness globally of the burden that women face and the disproportionate negative effects that are experienced by them in times of shock, like we do have now with the pandemic. Women lost their income disproportionately compared to men because they're overrepresented in sectors with low margin retail businesses. They also have had a disproportionate caregiving responsibilities, partly due to the social norms that prioritizes men as breadwinners over women when work is scarce and trouble is hitting in the family. And I would say that maybe one of the achievements of this crisis, in a way, is that this awareness is increasingly translating into efforts to better understand what doesn't work for women and why, and then figuring out solutions to address those problems. Obviously, the pandemic has accelerated digitization, which I think brings both opportunities and risks for women, as we all know. But I would say, if I look at the opportunity side and the positive side of it, governments have really turned to digital, for instance, helping rapidly disperse subsidies to large numbers of people, and especially a lot of them women. I mean, just an example of Bangladesh, I think 2/3 of the accounts that were created between March and August last year, in the heat of the crisis in Bangladesh, 2/3 of those accounts were opened by women. That really helped to close that considerable gender gap in financial inclusion in the country as a starting point. I also think many more governments are now digitizing G2P payment programs with and kind of a mindset of thinking about the women that receive those payments. And there is a concerted effort to take advantage of the experience that has happened or has come from several pilots before, but now throughout the crisis have really been truly able to scale up with a large amount of support through stimulus payments and support mechanisms. So there are now much more clear design options when it comes to KYC or choice of providers, distribution options that really take into account what some of the challenges and constraints are that women have accessing these resources. So I would say that one of the achievements of this crisis is actually that we do see more awareness on the constraints for women in digital financial inclusion and seeing opportunities to address those. And some of the guidance that CGAP put together with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Bank, and Women's World Banking last year actually really gives very concrete options for governments how they can take the interest of women at heart to empower them through these programs. So that's just one thing that I would highlight here. Back to
Great.
you,
Thank you
Zainab.
so much, Anthony. So moving on to Tanya. Tanya, what do you think has been the biggest achievement? All right. I'm sorry, Tanya. We can't seem to hear you. So let's come back to you. In the meanwhile, we can see if your audio can improve. So we'll move on to Dr. Mariam. Dr. Mariam, in your opinion, what has been the biggest achievement?
Thank you, Zainab. That's a great question. I think that sort of highlighting what Antonique said, but then also I think countries like Pakistan, most of the developing countries, especially in the global south, there's always been this sort of big digital divide, particularly as it pertains this gender digital divide. And I think one of the unintended consequences of the pandemic has been the amplification of that. And so now it has really sort of become highlighted. The spotlight has been on this gender divide and sort of the sort of the impact of not having access to digital services, right? What happens to populations that do not have that access? Now, whether that's access because of, limited access to hardware or sort of just literacy, many different sort of factors lead into this. But I think for women particularly, a lot of it is very cultural, right? So this idea of phones, why would a woman need to have a phone and what is she doing on a phone and who's she talking to? That sort of started to change a little bit because so much of what women now are looking to do is, as Antonique said, women work predominantly in the informal sector. And so they have very little sort of assurances of their job. And that's one of the things that as household workers, women were the first to sort of lose their jobs. And so a lot of them started looking towards leveraging digital resources to set up businesses, to sell their products, to work from home. And they just don't have the skill set to do that. And now organizations and governments are thinking about, well, I mean, this is not acceptable, right? And I think that's been one of the biggest unintended consequences where women themselves have woken up to digital potential. So pre-pandemic, when we would talk to women, it was, their approach or their attitude was more in terms of, well, why do we need this, right? What does this do for us that we're sort of that we cannot do in the real world, right? And that sort of really, that point has been driven home, not just to government and NGOs and financial sectors. I think that point has been sort of driven home to women themselves, and they're now willing to learn and willing to spend money to buy a phone and data packages, and they're willing to make that effort because they're realizing in a post-pandemic world just how essential that is. And I think in general, so the latest data that I was looking at, it shows that after the COVID-19 lockdowns, the daily app downloads in the finance category of mobile apps on Android devices jumped by 30%, if compared to pre-lockdown baselines, right? And this data is based on a sample of 74 countries, out of which 40 are classified as developing countries. North America and Asia saw the largest increases in adoption, both in absolute and relative terms. So I think that's sort of, and which means that we now find ourselves in this really, really exciting space where women themselves are willing to get on board. They see the potential for it. And I think that, like, given all the research that's happened over the last decade or so, we're better placed to create solutions, to design technologies that sort of fit their needs.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Mariam. So, what we're really hearing is that the C-session caused by the pandemic actually really helped highlight, issues of access and issues of use, both for women themselves and for policymakers and for governments. And that really has been the achievement because now there is an impetus to go forward and work on these solutions. So, thank you so much. We'll quickly go on to Shazad Iqbal sir. So, Shazad, if you could tell us what you think has been the greatest achievement.
Thank you, Zainab. I think Antonique and Dr. Mariam has rightly highlighted that the women are the ones who were disproportionately impacted because of this pandemic. Pandemic has impacted different economies in a different manner, and but one thing which is common if we look at across the economies is the rapid rollout of digitization across countries, and same experience has been witnessed in Pakistan as well. When we look at the numbers that State Bank has published last year at the end of December, we have seen that there is a tremendous increase in terms of number of transactions that has happened, or e-transactions, for example, e-commerce transactions. They were raised by around 24% as compared to the similar period of the last previous period. So if you look at the volume, it's about 133 billion dollars of transaction happened during this e-commerce platform. Same we have seen in the mobile banking transaction. We have seen a 24% rise in, 147% rise in transaction in the quarter ended on December 2020. So one thing is that I mean everyone is realizing that this is the time everyone needs it. The businesses have shifted their momentum towards digitization as well, and at the same time, the trickle down impact of that is also going to the lower or marginalized communities in Pakistan. So, Kashf is also participating in that by providing mobile wallet to their clients, which are all females, and we are educating them. And one thing which we have observed during our pilot is that in the digital literacy is also very important. I mean, the clients that we are working with, they don't know how to use these digital instruments, how to conduct transaction. There is an element of fear as well, but at the same time, when you are working with the families, it makes it a little bit easier. For example, if you are training a female client and the daughter of that client, that makes it much more easier for the clients to do the transaction. But at the same time, the ownership of telephone is also something which is very important. I mean, in a culture like Pakistan, females don't own the phones. So that is also one of the challenges that we have seen. But yes, the awareness is quite high, and we are expecting that with the passage of time, in the coming years, and the organizations like Kashf and other branchless banking providers are working together to increase the digitization in the economy. So that will be that will help us in the future. That is something that we are seeing. And a couple of things that the regulator has done in the pandemic, which has helped this increase in transaction, was, for example, they have eliminated the fee on IBFT, interbank fund transfer facilities. So that boosted the confidence, and that also reduced the cost of doing a transaction. So initiatives like this, I mean, these are very helpful in increasing the transaction over these platforms. Similarly, they have incentivized the POS installations, and that has helped in increasing the installation of POS machines by the banking industry.
Great. Thank you so much. So we see a large number, we see a boom in e-commerce transactions, and we see a boom on mobile banking transactions, and we're hoping that these will create the impetus for this to move downstream also and trickle down. So that's that, according to Shazad, is the biggest achievement. So we're going to move on to the question for Antonique. Tanya's having some issue join. Well, she's here now. Tanya, can you hear us? All right. Your voice is still gargled, so we'll move on to the questions for Antonique, and I'll have somebody from my team call you and see how that can be done. Great. So, Antonique, we'll move on to the first question for you. And, I think what's really important over here, Shazad's also talked about transactions. And a lot of the times when we're looking at digital finance, we're talking about numbers of transactions. But what really does it mean to transform via, digital services, digital financial services for women? And also, there's this aspiration of this transformation. Where do you think we are from, transaction to transformation? How far have we sort of gone with that? So my question to you is how you define transformation, and then what part of this transformation we're closer to, and what parts are more aspirational at this point in time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Zainab. And I really liked the interventions of Dr. Miriam and Shazad. I think Dr. Miriam already kind of put a bit of a spotlight on this notion of gender transformation when she spoke about the tipping point that we've achieved throughout the crisis. So I would define gender transformative approaches and solutions in financial inclusion, those approaches and solutions that are really focusing on not only reducing gaps in financial inclusion, but really focusing on or addressing rather the barriers in agency and control over financial resources. And that definition gets us closer to addressing the specific gender constraints that women are facing and going beyond access and use of services to actually the benefit of those services in the real economy, in their daily lives, with control and agency to do with these resources what women want to do and believe that they should be doing for their themselves and their families. Um, just one example, we know, for instance, that transferring funds through direct deposit to women's accounts or mobile wallets, for instance, gives them more control over the use of financial services and improved economic empowerment. And there's increasing numbers of research pieces and evidence of experiences where we've seen that. Just one example I'll give you on from India, where depositing wage payments for the in the context of a federal work program directly leading to women's bank accounts, and then also coupled with training for women on the benefits of these accounts, really increase the likelihood of women working. So that strengthening of women's control over their income actually seemed to enhance their bargaining power and empower them to push against some restrictive gender norms, particularly the norm that women shouldn't be working outside of the house here. And in this particular program, the intervention led women to hold more liberal attitudes towards women working and women's mobility. And more women reported visiting common public places like markets and health centers. And so there was more liberty in that context. So the effects were even greater, apparently, for the women whose family members had strong attitudes against women's work in the beginning. So that's just one example from India. Another example I'll give from Uganda, which was actually in the context of a microfinance institution that provided the microfinance loans to female borrowers distributed through mobile money as opposed to giving that out in cash or otherwise. And that actually increased the profits of those women's businesses by 15%, 1 5. So that's kind of an significant and tangible impact on women who otherwise would have experience maybe more pressure to share the loan or the money of the loan with their family members. And of course, when the mobile money infrastructure exists, and as Dr. Shahzad said very well, when women have access to a phone, are able to use the phone, have the knowledge and the skills to do it, and also feel confident to do so, then digital financial services can clearly be promising in terms of women's economic empowerment and leading to that transformation that you were asking about. In terms of how far have we come, I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think oftentimes we saw or we have seen a lot of pilots here and there, research project, these kinds of evidence. I really hope that we see a much more rapid scaling up of these kind of efforts with a specific focus on these norms that are barriers or providing, posing barriers to further inclusion of women and economic empowerment, because I do think that these kind of gendered social norms stand out as the thing that we need to try to address. One more thing I would like to say on maybe the digital financial literacy in particular, as that was already commented on, the women's financial inclusion community of practice that is convened by CGAP called FinEquity actually pulled together a lot of insights and knowledge that is already available within the sector, within our industry, about what does it take to get digital financial inclusion, and what kind of enablers do we have for digital financial literacy. And I would love the audience to take a look at that publication about these 5 enablers, which are literacy, numeracy, access, awareness, and design. And I think Dr. Miriam has already referred to some of these design examples. Back to you,
Great.
Zainab.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashnik. So essentially, the way we're looking at transformation is the ability for these women to actually control and use the money that they have on these digital platforms and to be able to leverage on the different options available on these digital platforms. And yes, I hear you on the pilots. We hear a lot about them, and we're really hoping that because there's now the impetus for change because of the pandemic, we can actually take these massify them and take them out in the open and sort of really change the digital finance landscape for women. Anthony kind of alluded to some of the challenges that women face in accessing digital financial services, but I think I'd like to ask a question which is a bit broader than to you, Dr. Mariam, in terms of what are the barriers that exist for women to actually access technology. And, if we can address those, then it'll be easier maybe for us to address the barriers that come for specifically financial digital finance. So the question is, if you could share the biggest challenges, maybe the top 2 or 3 that women face in accessing technology, and we can see how those apply to financial inclusion technologies also.
Thank you, Zainab. That's a great question. So there are a couple of big ones, right? I think that Shahzad also already referred to one of the big ones, which is access to hardware, right? So the physical access to a device. But it turns out that's really not the biggest one, right? I think as more and more devices become cheaper and ubiquitous, that's sort of a barrier that's sort of resolving itself almost organically, right? Just because devices are now cheaper and ubiquitous. Your telcos in Pakistan, they now have all these great, very affordable data packages specifically for WhatsApp or for YouTube or Facebook and all of those things, right? I think what I'm finding in Pakistan amongst women is particularly, I think privacy is one of the big ones. Now, privacy frameworks and how technology is currently being designed is coming from a very Western understanding of privacy, right? As an individual right. And that's not how it's conceived, or that's not how it's performed in a Pakistani context, right? And so women here are, when we talk to them, they're really, really reluctant to acknowledge their need for privacy, right? So they'll say things like, why are you asking me this question? Ask this from somebody who actually needs privacy. I have done nothing wrong. So this idea of requiring privacy that is so deeply linked with having done something that you want to hide, right? That is not to say that they don't need privacy or that they're not looking to leverage certain technological affordances to carve out that privacy, right? So for example, women tell us that, I thought the WhatsApp, if for those of you who've used WhatsApp has these 2 options for you to delete conversations. So one of them is delete for me, and one is delete for everybody, right? Now, the problem with that is women in the beginning were really excited about this because that meant that they could have these private conversations and then they could remove the trace of that conversation from the phone. Because even when they're owning their own phones, even when it's not a shared phone, they're unable to password lock it. They're unable to use any kind of obvious, visible privacy affordance because in their homes and in the culture that they live in, that implies secrecy and that implies they're doing something wrong. And so it's a very, very sort of complex understanding of privacy where they want it, but they want it to be they want the boundary to not be visible, right? And the boundary being visible and you enacting and performing privacy as an inalienable right is a very, very Western concept, right? And so when these technologies come here, and so the women were really excited that they could now delete these conversations. But it turns out for most of us who've used this feature, once you delete, WhatsApp still has a message there that says conversation was deleted, right? Which defeats the purpose of having invisible or secret privacy as an option for women to enact and perform privacy in digital spaces. right? We've spoken to women who have sort of home based, they're micro entrepreneur women who are running these little businesses at home, and they have their primary means of saving and sort of financial management is digital, is sort of having roscas, which are your committees colloquially that are called these peer lending and borrowing groups, or they use money guards in neighborhoods, right? So it'll be an older woman who's divorced or widowed, and whatever money they have saved at the end of the week or the month, they'll go and hand it to her and ask her to hold on to them. Again, because within their homes, it's very, very difficult to save privately. It's to save money for things that they consider important, right? Things like their daughter's education or dowry or building another room to their house. And these are not things that are considered important for the family or the husband or the mother-in-law, but for themselves. Now, once you digitize this, right, because you really haven't thought about privacy in this context, once you digitize this, you are taking these hidden savings and you are sort of making them visible, right? And so you're taking power away from women that have worked within the patriarchal structures that constrain them. So women we've worked with in Pakistan are super smart and they're very aware of their constraints and they've figured out mechanisms to circumvent those constraints, right? I think one of the biggest failings is that technologies currently do not leverage those mechanisms. Women have this figured out. They know how to do this, right? It's just designers have not tapped into the ways women are currently using mechanisms to circumnavigate their constraints. And so I would say privacy is a big one. Literacy is another big one. So most of the women we've spoken to, even when they're saving their contacts on their phone, they're not really saving them as names. They'll do hashtag 123, and in their minds that's mapped to a person, right? Or they'll say, star 345, and that's mapped to maybe their son or their husband. And that's how, because literacy just doesn't exist. But I think where there is this sort of ties into the fourth thing that I think is a bigger challenge. Where women find inherent use for a piece of technology, they're able to figure it out like that, right? So one of the women that we spoke to was an older woman, and when we first spoke to her, she had her daughter put on the dramas on YouTube that she wanted to watch. And we went back with a follow-up conversation with her a couple of months later, and she said, my daughter got really sick of doing this for me. But she showed me this great voice search feature that YouTube has. And that's a feature I didn't know YouTube has because I've never had to use it. And she said, and so now I just voice search my content myself. And this is an older woman. And so I think literacy again, is once you sort of give them something that brings value to their lives, it adds to the kinds of things that they want to do. They will figure it out, right? I mean, even if it's not designed for them, they're going to go and figure this out. I mean, the way women use WhatsApp in Pakistan, it amazes me. I mean, they know features I don't know, right? Just they have this feature of disappearing messages, which was told to me by a participant, right? These are things I'm not aware of because I don't need to be aware of these in my context, right? Like privacy for me does function like an individual right. So I think that takes me to my last point, which is use cases. I think for a lot of technologies, especially when you're talking about digital financial services, I've had women saying to me, I know Jazz Cash, kya hota hai? I know what Easy Pesa is. So these are mobile wallets, right? And they're like, but these are for rich people. What am I going to do with it? Right? Because the use cases that these services provide, they're not tapping into what these women's aspirations or their needs are, right? They're not tapping into anything that might be useful for them. And so these women will still go back to their neighborhood roscas and their neighborhood money guards because that alternative speaks more to their needs than what's currently in the market.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Mariam. So essentially, we're not looking at these people and looking at their needs when we're designing technology. And I'm just wondering, as you were speaking, that maybe the number of women designers at the design side of these apps and these technologies is also something that, is one of the obstacles because we don't have a lot of them. But, I think it's really, really important to have these use cases. And once we have these use cases, people will have higher uptake. Great points on that. So, yes, there's access to hardware, but once you have the hardware, you need to have human-centered and women-centered designing of the apps and of the different functionalities that these devices bring. So thank you so much, Dr. Mariam, for that. We'll quickly move on to Shahzad Iqbal. So Shahzad, as a representative from a women-focused microfinance provider, could you shed some light on what Kash Foundation has been doing to enable digital transformation for its clients?
Yes, and before sharing that, I would like to tell you about the context of the Kush Foundation as well. Kush Foundation is a non-bank finance company, and because of the license constraint, we cannot offer direct bank accounts or mobile wallets to our clients. So, keeping that in mind, I will share further updates a little bit in a while. So as any other institution, we started with the digitization of our internal processes first. So the first aim was to digitize our internal processes so our videos can learn about it, and then we will take it forward towards our clients. So in the second phase, when we have started finding out the product that we can offer to our clients, we have to partner with somebody who has a shared vision and mission with our institution, so that the kind of product that we want to offer to our clients, they can also share the similar values with us while offering the product to our clients. So in 2020, we partnered with one of the mobile service provider based bank, and we started pilot in two of our branches. We offered a mobile wallet to our clients, and that was successful. And based on the successful pilot, we have rolled it out into two of our regions. And right now, I mean, we have dispersed almost 10,000 loans to 10,000 clients, and some of the clients have also doing multiple transaction, like they are I mean recovery and disbursement are the transaction they are conducting with us, but they're also doing like making utility bill payments and other stuff as well. So that is something that we have already achieved, and our vision is to roll it out across all the branches of Kash Foundation, because we believe that it is the way forward. And it is efficient not only for the clients but for us as well. It is safe for the clients and for us as well, and it is convenient as well for the clients. When they are moving out of the bank branches and shifted towards these digital modes, they are feeling more safe and more the control of the funds is in their hands now. They can make withdrawals, they can deposit money in their accounts, and they can get the benefits of having a mobile wallet from the bank as well. So this is something that we have achieved so far. And while we were designing this process, we were very conscious that the process should be seamless for our clients. They should not. It's a frictionless experience for the clients from moving from a bank branch to a digital account. So that is we have achieved so far, and we are very hopeful that we will roll it out across the network. One thing that I would like to, on the previous conversation, I would like to mention that right now, yes, mobiles is getting cheaper and people will get with the passage of time. But at the same time, the SIM ownership is also an issue. And the digital literacy is also one of the biggest issue, because we are experiencing it. I mean, our clients are not able to dial the strings on feature phone to make a transaction. So we have to spend a lot of time creating awareness amongst our clients on the benefits of the digital wallets, as well as on the usage of the digital wallets as well. So this is a task which is not an easy task, although the pandemic has helped us in speeding up the process, and and the multi-level marketing is also playing its role. I mean, there is a segment who is now using digital means quite frequently, and we will see in the future that the trickle down effect of this will coming in our market as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Azad. So what we're hearing from you is that, the way that you guys are doing it is that you first went and piloted it so you could actually see what were the obstacles and what were the key disablers, so to say, and then address them in a rollout that you are now planning to do for all of your clients, which as a member of Kashf, I know is 500,000. So it is a sizable number. So
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's what Kashf's interaction on this interface has been. Thank you so much, Azad, for sharing those lessons and that pilot and the subsequent rollout. I'll move back to you, Antonique, and I'll ask you a question which you somehow also alluded to earlier in the question that we were talking about initially. So I really want to know, what do you think will be the other multipliers or the other positive unintended outcomes of digital financial inclusion for women? So do you think that other issues such as labor force participation, which is very low for especially for developing countries for women, do you think those things will also be impacted by digital financial solutions and as more and more women become included digitally?
Yeah, I think so. And as you said, I already kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier, but I think that the notion of digitizing the economy could bring opportunities for women. And I also, picking up on what Dr. Mariam was saying, I think if we do figure out digital financial services that actually bring value in women's lives and that they see a use case for, then they will pick it up. They will figure it out. And as she said, women are savvy enough to figure out what is in their interest. So I do think that we will see it pick up as and when it's of use. And one of these examples, even though this is still kind of a niche a niche segment of the market, I would say, but one of these examples that we looked at CGAP specifically are women that are engaging in gig work on platforms. So there are a multitude of platforms that are mushrooming have been mushrooming in the last couple of years, from ride hailing to domestic work, microtasking, and so on. And you see that women are figuring out their ways to leverage digital tools to get onto these platforms, to get access to opportunities that are offered to them digitally, matchmaking. There's some e-commerce going on there as well, of course. And I think to the extent that women have activities that they can move to a digital platform or even see new opportunities to create there, I think we will see a new type of participation in this digital economy for women. It's, as I said, it's still a very niche market. What we did find in the research that it still remains challenging for women to kind of cross the barriers of that norms pose on what kind of work they can get engaged in. So it's still more typical female jobs that they will get into. But in any case, it's an expanding and an opportunity that sometimes can give them more flexibility and actually allow them to work with the constraints that they have, for instance, care responsibilities. We also, so the kind of research that I just referred to hasn't been published yet, but we did that in Indonesia, India, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. But another piece of research that CGAP undertook in Asia, which was in Bangladesh actually, and Pakistan, and Myanmar 2 years ago, looked specifically at how women, as savvy as they are, as you just commented on, are using WhatsApp and Facebook to leverage their networks and really to build on their social activities to sell products. So they're not using the e-commerce platforms like you have many around the world now, but they're actually figuring out the networks and using the digital tools to expand their businesses and do promotion and engagement and interaction with customers. So I do think that, again, if the use case is there, if they see the value, then they will figure it out. And I truly believe that as designers, as financial service providers, we have an opportunity to actually boost those businesses and also create a win-win situation for the financial service providers and for the customers if we're able to respond to the needs that these women have and the particular kind of financial services and gaps that they have in their lives. Um, so that I think is an important consideration. It's still a small segment of the market. There are still a lot of challenges with the digital divide that have been commented on, but I do think this notion of creating value and finding the match with the right needs is where we can also kind of give more labor force participation opportunities for women.
Great. So the way I hear it is that there's some opportunities that may be incremental. So, networking and, increasing their markets, but then there are some opportunities which may be completely disruptive. So a complete new segment can also be open to women as a result of, technological platforms and digitalization of the economy. So, really, really need to work on those use cases then so that more women can actually not just leapfrog for digital finance, but also, change the way that the economy, change their interaction and their relationship in the larger economy. So thank you so much for that, Anthony. We'll move on to a question for Dr. Mariam now. Dr. Mariam, so we've also spoken a bit about this, and this conversation has been coming, back to the use cases and back to the, design of the technology and design of, what is being used and design of the utility. So what do you think would be the top three, design centered considerations that can really help women become digitally enabled? So, what are the three things that, developers, governments, regulators really need to look at to make these technologies more sort of women centered, keeping in mind, human centered design principles?
Thank you, Zainab. So, I mean, I'm just going to go back to my earlier comments around some of the challenges, and I think privacy is a big one. I really think we need to sit down and reimagine privacy frameworks and sort of nail down what privacy affordances need to look like for contexts that are not Western, right? That allow women to sort of exert agency and that allow them to occupy the digital space. So, Anthony was talking about women sort of not using e-commerce platforms, but actually leveraging social networks. And part of the reason for that, and she's absolutely right, right? Like, I think Zainab, you and I, and most women who are watching this who are based in Pakistan are part of some one or two women only groups on Facebook, right? Because that was the first thing I was told when I moved to Pakistan. Join this particular group because this is where you'll find your gynecologist. This is where you'll find your doctor. This is where you'll find your pediatrician. This is where you'll have access to all of these women who are doing all of this commercial stuff from home, right? So they're making candles and they're stitching clothes, and you will get whatever service you want. You will get it from this closed Facebook group, right? And I think part of it is because it is a gendered space, right? It is a closed Facebook group that only women occupy. And so women are reluctant to occupy sort of the open internet because of privacy concerns, right? Because of how their data, their images, their context, their information, how that might be used. So I think that's sort of a broader conversation around privacy and setting up private digital spaces for women. Women have, as I keep saying, like I am always blown away by sort of the hacks that women sort of employ. So because there is no free, safe, non-judgmental space for them, they go ahead and they create their own closed Facebook groups, and then they do whatever they want in those spaces, right? I'm not sure, Zainab, if you saw this or not. A couple of weeks ago, there was this article in the newspaper where some women in, I think it was Balochistan or interior Sindh, in one of the remote parts of the country, they had a couple of buffaloes that they wanted to sell, but they have mobility constraints, so they couldn't go to the bigger city to do it. And the rates that they were getting in their own little village weren't that great because these middlemen would buy the buffaloes from them and take them to the city and sell them at a huge profit. And so the women said, you know what, this is just not okay. They took pictures of their buffaloes, they put them up online on Facebook, and that's how they sold their buffaloes to somebody out of their village, right? So they cut the middleman out. And I would imagine these are not women who have undergraduate degrees or who even done like up to 12th grade, right? But this is something they're able to figure out. And as we do, most of my work is qualitative and ethnographic in nature. And the more work we do, the more women we talk to, the more we hear stories like these of women leveraging digital tech in ways that suits them, but not necessarily in the ways that were designed, right? So I would say thinking about sort of reimagining privacy. My second big sort of recommendation and pet peeve actually is this idea of designing for needs, right? And that doesn't particularly suit women very well. I would recommend instead perhaps designing for aspirations instead, right? So build use cases around women's aspirations. Basically, a methodology that seeks to avoid changing people is unlikely to succeed at outcomes that require human change. And that's what development is at heart, right? And development requires deep changes in your attitude, your skills, and your values. And traditional design stresses convenience and accommodation of users, and it doesn't really look at these aspirations, right? And designers so far, they've tended to see their goal as the creation of goods and services that are pleasant to use and convenient for people. That is to say, design explicitly avoids asking people to change. And sort of development practices sort of need to shift to focus on human aspirations and ones that move attention away from problem solving to people nurturing, right? So looking at how do you nurture these women? How do you nurture their aspirations? Aspirations that are kind of desired, that are persistent, unlike needs, right? And they aim for something higher. And so in our work, we find that, DFS or mobile wallets, they're a great example of this. Women don't need mobile wallets per se, right? This is not a need they have. But would it help them to achieve their aspirations? Absolutely, right? Is it doing that? No. But does it have the potential to do that? Yes, right? Would they change if they could achieve their desires? Yes, right? And all the women, so this is sort of a standard question, regardless of whether I'm talking to women about their maternal health or their finances or sort of their tech use. One of my last questions is always about what is it that you aspire to? And they all have these big aspirations, right? These big desires of what they want their life to look like. And it's very disconnected from needs, right? And so if we could sort of tap into those aspirations and say, so for very, very often their aspiration is, I'd like my kids to be educated, right? So I don't want them, especially my daughters, I don't want them to have the life I have. I want them to work in an office, right? Now, these women are low literate themselves. They've never been part of formal schooling. Is there a way for us to tie saving for their kids' college or school with also guiding them about what that roadmap looks like, right? So this is what fifth grade should be, and this is what sixth grade should be, and these are the milestones your child needs to hit. And so we'll help you get your child to college, but we'll also help you save for your child to get to college, right? And so combining sort of these aspirations with their finances, right? Because for some of the women, it's their kids' education. For a lot of them, it is, I want to build my own house. But how do they get there? They don't have the skill set to be able to leverage what they already have and combine that with saving or financial products to be able to do that. And I think there's so much potential here for financial service providers to sort of tap into that and say, you know what, you want to get your kids educated, we'll draw up the roadmap for you. We will help you get your child. And women spend money on that. Even those who can't afford it, they will prioritize their child's healthcare and their child's education, right? So their kids are going to private schools and their kids have tuition in the evenings, right? So they'll have extra help because the one thing the women can do is throw money at it. They just don't have the knowledge to help their child get there, right? And so if we look at that aspiration and we see, can we build use cases around that? I think that would be really powerful. The third thing I would say is something that Anthony actually hinted at, is social connectivity. I think that if you look at the way women save, if you look at the way they run their commerce, it's very, very social, right? So Roscas or committees, they're centered around this idea of a group of women getting together, women who know each other, women who have sort of a certain social standing in their communities, getting together, pulling in money, meeting now and then, right? And I think sort of financial products and most technologies that are designed for women tend to overlook this need that women have to connect to each other, right? And I still think those are my sort of big recommendations for ways forward.
Great. So essentially, you want us to rethink the way that we think to really be able to sort of, provide the services that we need for women. So, I mean, I really hear you on the aspirational aspect. We also, when we speak to our clients, they talk about, what they would like for the future. And one of the things that does come up is, their daughters and their education. So, really building technology and use cases around aspirations is something that I've heard for the first time. And it now makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much, Dr. Mariam, for sharing that. We'll move on to our last question for this panel discussion before we move on to the questions that we have from the audience, and this is for Shazad. So Shazad, just like Dr. Mariam was mentioning, digital financial services. Beyond digital financial services, there's a lot of role that technology can play, and there can be a lot of interplay between technology and digital finance to really, create transformation and create change and, help people realize their aspirations. And so the question is, how else is Kashf and how else is microfinance in Pakistan really, using technology to enhance women's access to financial services and to, better opportunities within the economy?
Thank you, Zainab. This is a very interesting question. So the technology is here, and how are we going to use the data points is something that we need to understand. So if we are analyzing the data and understanding the life cycles of the clients, we will be in a better position to create something for our clients. For example, if we are not making quick decision making, a client is requiring money for their monthly groceries, and if we can collaborate with some of the online stores and connect these clients with them, and we are actually helping both the clients and that online store as well, by providing a credit facility to them. Right now they are getting informal credit facility from the local shopkeepers, where they can get, they are usually getting expensive products, and expensive rates as well. So we can, so it is on us how we are using these data points and how are we leveraging on the technology. Then I mean, there is a lot of work happening on the artificial intelligence and on machine based learning. So how are we using algorithm based decision making techniques, so we can bring efficiencies in the microfinance activities and bring down the cost, and eventually pass on the benefit of the lower cost to the clients. So being in the my microfinance institution, I think we need to understand the technology in a better manner. We need to analyze in a way that we can collaborate that data points with the life cycle needs of the clients and design our products according to that. At the same time, we can also look at the ways that can help and facilitate our clients in making their decisions as well. For example, if a client is needing something, how these data points or how the technology can help guide these clients to make the right decision instead of going in the wrong direction. So these are different things that we can explore, and I think many people are working on that and will explore in the future as well.
Great. So thank you. So I think what Shazad is really referring to is the Internet of Things. What data can we collect and how can we leverage on that data to bring efficiency in decision making, whether it's at the financial provider's end vis-a-vis, disbursement of loans, or whether it's on the client's end or, general public's end, so that they can make better, more informed decisions about small things like purchases. So that's what else technology can do. It can, make you more informed and then create those efficiencies. So thank you so much, Shazad, for sharing that. We'll quickly move on to the questions that we have from the audience. So I think, Dr. Mariam, maybe this is a question we can take for you. Sort of, maybe you can address this. It's the question on how digital transformation in Pakistan has also made women vulnerable to scams, hacking, and also subject to more exploitation by agents dispersing cash transfers. How can this gap be addressed by the regulators? So that's one question I thought that maybe you could address. On if anyone else wants to take a pick on that, please let me know.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. And I think that sort of low literacy in general makes you vulnerable when you're using digital technologies for all kinds of scams. And I think one of the biggest solutions, regardless of what the regulators do, I think literacy, sort of an understanding of sort of the kinds of ways and mechanisms in which you can be vulnerable. I think it kind of needs to be at the end users end, right? Where you build in specific features or affordances into your financial applications that make it very sort of that educate users on the kinds of ways that can be scammed.
If
Great.
I
Thank
can
you so
maybe
much,
quickly
Mariam.
jump into that, Zainab, I think I fully agree with Dr. Mariam's observation. I think we need to do a much better job to design in a way that can help the end user detect and avoid getting into trouble. And I think we're not doing a good enough job in that context. So I wouldn't leave it just to the regulator to get that fixed, because oftentimes the regulators are catching up, seeing problems in the market, and then trying to fix. But we need to think ahead of the game, and we need to think as we're designing, how can we build in those securities?
Sure. So preemptively, how can these be addressed? And then, at the regulators level, it could probably translate into financial education and focus on, literacy and numeracy, the things that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to quickly move on to the next question, which Antonique, I'm going to pose to you. This is on what policy level changes can be done to augment women's financial inclusion. At the regulators level, what are the things that may have worked in your experience when in your research? And what are the things that they're not doing and maybe they should be doing? So if you could shed some light on that.
Well, I think there's several ways to look at this. One way would be the policies and what kind of development efforts can be made to address some of the challenges that women face in financial inclusion. And I think throughout this panel, we've already shed light on the fact that this has different dimensions. It's not limited to the financial sector as a whole. It's about their economic participation. It's about the way that they can get access to services or not. So I think keeping a mindset as a policymaker of understanding what the context for women is, what their preferences are, what their aspirations are. I really like Dr. Miriam calling that out, but also what some of the constraints are that culturally and norms wise are being imposed on them. On the regulatory front, I think we're oftentimes thinking policy or regulations are gender neutral. They're for everybody, and that's exactly where it goes wrong because they don't play out in the same way for everybody, right? Just because some of those constraints that are embedded and ingrained in the kind of society, some regulations will play out differently for men than for women. And of course, when I say women, women are not just one homogeneous group of people either, of course. So much getting a much better understanding where the vulnerabilities are, um, and analyze regulations and how they play out and how they affect women. And when I refer to policies and regulations, I also want to call out the development community because I think oftentimes funders and market facilitators are engaging with these actors to try and advance women's financial inclusion. I think a much better understanding also among funders and market facilitators about how gender norms are actually affecting and making some interventions way less effective than they should be is important. And I hope that together we can actually build back better. I think this crisis we should really take. They say never waste a good crisis. I really think we should use this crisis as an opportunity to um, rethink business models and behaviors across the ecosystem. And at CGAP, we've done some thinking about that. We have some recommendations also for funders and facilitators. I'd be very happy to share that separately as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Angelique. And this reminds me of something that, we have a first female deputy governor at the State Bank of Pakistan, Ms. Seema Kamil, and she talks a lot about gender intentionality. And I think that's really what you're really talking about also, that the intention needs to be gendered. So you need to start from the designing phase, from the word go, gender has to be part of it. It can't be something that gets added on later. So thank you so much for that. And I mean, your point on specifically, women, again, gender not being homogenous. So, you need to look at what works for different groups within gender also. So thank you for shedding light on that. And our last question from the audience is for you, Shazad. And the question is, what were the challenges that Kash faced or is facing in the mobile wallet-led disbursement? So if you could shed some light on that.
Yes, there are a couple of challenges that we are facing. For example, I have already mentioned about the ownership of SIMs, then the digital literacy. This is another challenge that we are facing. So we are working on it, and we are continuously engaging with our clients. I'm just trying to give you an example. It took almost three cycles to us to guide the clients or to train them on doing a recovery transaction with us. So every time there is a recovery installment, our business development officer assists the client to do that transaction. But as Dr. Mariam has already mentioned in her earlier comments, that when you have a device in your hand and you are doing the transaction, you will learn how to do this transaction. And I think with the passage of time and doing again and again, clients will learn, and it is the user experience. And once I strongly believe, once you are using it, you will be addicted to it. I mean, you cannot get away from doing the cash transaction once you are addicted to it.
Great. On that positive note, creating the use cases and then creating the stickiness for our users for all kinds of technology. And really that has to be the way forward and the way that we think about this. Thank you so much, Shazad, for your contribution and for this answer. I think what we've really been hearing all across this panel discussion is that there is now a great awareness for not just the need for digital finance, but also how there is a gendered aspect to it. And this great awareness is actually creating an impetus for change. It's actually creating people to think about this differently. And of course, a lot more work needs to be done on thinking about this differently. And it needs to be looked at from a human-centered, from a women-centered, from a gendered perspective. And all players, need to really sort of, pull out their socks and really need to sort of deep dive into how we can make this better, how we can make this easier for women, how we can create those use cases. So whether it's the regulators, whether it's the funders, whether it's the market development facilities, whether it's the researchers, or whether it's the actual practitioners on ground. So with that note and that sort of call to action, I would really like to thank my panelists again for being part of this session. Thank you so much, Antony. Thank you so much, Shazad. Thank you so much, Dr. Mariam. Unfortunately, we could not hear from IFC because Tanya had some issues on the technology side. So we're really sorry to have missed out, but thank you so much for taking time out and being part of this panel. I know that you're on the backstage right now and you're listening to all of us, so thank you for that, Tanya. Thank you to the Financial Inclusion Week for letting us host this discussion, and thank you to all of our attendees for attending this session. The bios for all of the speakers are already available on the website if you want to get in touch or learn more. Antonique has already shared some of the research findings that she was referring to, which have been put in your chat boxes. So please go through them. And if there are any questions, you can email either the Financial Inclusion Week or you can email Kash and we'll try and address them for you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
And thank you, Zainab, for moderating. It's